The subject for today is online dating and why it will never work the way we all hope it will. Human beings have basically evolved to interact in person, face to face. And yet, when we, especially mature people like me, hear about online dating or get into a position of being single and needing to meet members of the opposite sex or the same sex, depending on your preference, we look to online dating, and especially if we've never tried it before, and think, wow, this is going to be it. It's going to be like shopping for human beings online, shopping for spouses online. It's going to be fantastic. And yet it doesn't quite work out that way, not even for young people with Tinder. Welcome to the Madman Rants. I'm your host, Kevin Leonard. Why should you listen to me? Why should you listen to me in general? Sure, but why should you listen to me speaking about online dating? Well, number one, I was been single a lot in my life. I was single in my teens and early 20s, and then got married for a period of 8 years. I was then single again in my 30s and stayed single for a period of about 9 years in total. My first wife I met without the help of online dating. We met at a place we worked at together, a grocery store. My second wife I met at a place I worked at again, a bar that I had on Avenue Road in downtown Toronto with a couple of partners. And I was then married for 13 years and single again for several years in my 50s, 5 years in total. And I was lucky enough to find love via online dating, no less. However, I learned a lot about online dating in the meantime. And what I did during those 5 years in my 50s was, because I'm obsessive compulsive and ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and I think those two things pretty much always go together, I went on to every online dating site that was out there. I'm also a marketing guy, so I did the market research and went on to every site possible. Everything from sugardaddy.com to Ashley Madison and everything in between. So I learned something about online dating. And in my life, I've not only been fortunate enough to have 3 or 4 deep loves in my life, but I've also had the opportunity to have a lot of intimate encounters with wonderful women, all of whom's company I appreciated greatly. Why else should you listen to me? I spent my entire career in the ad business, working for ad agencies in Canada, the US, the Middle East, and Africa, and Latin America. I had my own agency with a partner on the beach in Cancun, Mexico, Cancun and Playa del Carmen, Mexico for 6 years, and moved it to Mexico City for the last year of those 6. And during all that time, in interacting with people, in doing market research, in trying to understand human nature and what motivates people to do things, especially to buy things, I got a quite intense and in-depth look at human nature. And what people have told me, my clients and colleagues have told me, is that I have an ability to see connections between things, threads between things that weren't previously connected. And I'm able to help people understand how those things connect in a simple and a way that makes them go, aha, thank you, I didn't see that before. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about what I learned about online dating, why it works, but a lot about why it doesn't work all that well. You might agree with my point of view about the world and my opinions about people and human nature. You might not, but maybe that's the point, to get you to see a different perspective, because I see my job as trying to get people to go from intuitive thinking, tribal thinking, to much more centrist, rational, fact-based thinking, and being able to judge the different points of view and come up with something that probably is better for people than what might come up naturally because we happen to be hardwired for being leftist or hardwired for being rightist, and we're locked into those points of view. What I also believe to be true is that people who are curious grow their brains over time, and people who are incurious, well, just keep in mind that curiosity is linked to high IQ. So people who are incurious, yeah. Let's take a look at what I call the dating appeal funnel. What this represents, with true loves coming at the bottom, is all those people that you're attracted to, some of whom you actually end up being able to convince to date you, go into the top of the funnel, and hopefully out the bottom come the true loves. In my experience, you only find the true loves the ones that you are inexplicably attached to, and generally it's the ones with whom the sex is fantastic, and it's effortless, and it's wonderful, and it's mind-blowing, and you can't understand exactly why. It's only about 5% that turn out to be those amazing partners, sexual partners. Whether or not you can then find someone who at any given stage of your life is also compatible in a whole bunch of other ways that make you happy to be with them is another question altogether. And I think those people are maybe only 1 in 100 of the great dates you go on. Some people claim that they've met them serendipitously and right from the beginning or at very early in their life, and fantastic. That's great for them. That was not true for me, although I met wonderful women and loved the women that I married and stayed with for some time very deeply. The rare combination of 3 things, which I would consider to be fantastic: passion, sexual, physical part; the personality side, which is their sense of humor and how they are, what their values are, and their intellect, whether or not they stimulate you intellectually, and the fourth, which women are especially concerned about, and that's nurturing and financial support. Or is that person able and willing to go the extra mile in order to provide financially for the woman and the family? What I learned in using online dating was that there's a very big difference between human nature on the left side and online dating on the right side. They're really completely different things. And the reason I say that is when we look at the 7 criteria that I've come up with for what attracts us to another person, we've got physical appeal. That's things like the way that they look, their hair, their height, their weight, the way they carry themselves, their style sense. We've got visual cues, which is cues that we can see at a distance to their confidence, their sociability, their strength of character, their sensuality, their overall demeanor. Instinctual triggers like the tone of their voice and whether it grates on you or you find it melodic or neutral, whether or not their scent and pheromones are appealing to you. And that goes back to that 5% thing that I was talking about earlier, which is that we've lost the ability to really notice pheromones the way our great ape cousins do. But there's something that goes on in our brain, deep in our brain, connected with our olfactory sense, that indicates what kind of antibodies they've got in their blood versus those that we've got in ours and those in our tribal and family members. The antibodies, if they are significantly different, set off a trigger in our brains that says this is a good person to mate with. And I believe, although this has never been tested, I believe that reaction that happens in our brain is one of the things that releases our inhibition sexually. And so we have fantastic sex with these people because there's something that tells us, hey, you should go for it. You should get pregnant with this person. Other things that are instinctual triggers are whether or not the person is at ease or whether they are uptight. We look for things in personality, their humor, their confidence, the intensity that they have in terms of their personality, whether they are a good listener or a good talker, whether or not their IQ seems to be high and intellectually compatible with our own. We look for signs of nurturing. Are they a nurturer? Do they have a good job? Do they provide well for themselves and presumably for their family? What is their education level? What are their spending choices? Are they good with kids? Are they good with pets? We look to their interests, whether they're into sports like we are, or whether we're interested in someone who participates in sports even if we aren't, whether they're interested in the arts, their intellectual pursuits, their abilities, their interest in music, their interest in travel, etc. We look for their nature. Are they a risk taker? Are they generous? Are they thoughtful? Are they short-tempered, or are they demanding? So all of those things play a part in whether or not we find someone else appealing. The problem with online dating versus human nature is that when we look at human nature, all of those things from 1 through 7 work from top to bottom. And with online dating, it works quite the opposite way, and I'll explain what I mean by that. If you look at how you find out these 7 things with someone from, let's say, You see another single person at a wedding or at a conference you're at or on the subway. What happens is that across the room, whether or not you'd cross the room to speak with them, the physical appeal side is the first thing that you're going to notice. And you notice that at a distance. Their physical appeal, the visual cues that make you go, oh, I'm interested enough in this person to cross the room. Up close, you find out about the instinctual triggers, their scent, their pheromones, the tone of their voice, whether or not they're uptight or at ease. And on date one is when you find out about their personality and about whether or not they're nurturing. Generally, you don't even get to all the other stuff until maybe date 2 or beyond. Their interests, you might find that out on date 1, but it's not until date 2 or 3 that you start to find out about their actual nature, about whether or not they are generous or a risk taker, whether or not they're thoughtful or short-tempered, or whether they're very demanding. So, versus the way that human nature works most naturally, the way we evolved over 7 million years since our split from the chimpanzees genetically, which is all about being face-to-face, first at a distance, then close up, and smelling and feeling and touching and experiencing all of those things, those visceral things. What happens with online dating is that we actually we're supposed to figure out all of these things from 4, 5, 6, and 7 online, which is kind of bizarre when you think about it. So we're supposed to figure out, okay, it's going to be fantastic. As I said earlier, you're going to shop for a spouse, right? You're going to find out online whether they are a risk taker or generous or thoughtful or short-tempered or demanding online. And you're going to find out about their interests, which half the time they're lying about. You're going to find out about whether they're nurturing based on what they said their job or their education was. And you're going to find out about humor, etc., in terms of their personality. Now, stop and think about that. Number one, intuition doesn't work with things that are written online. Women especially are extremely prone to thinking that they can actually intuit all of these things by reading a profile. By reading between the lines, they're going to know whether a man is generous, whether or not he's a good listener, etc., etc. It's incredible, but that's what a lot of women think. And I've asked them about this, a lot of them, and they say, oh yeah, I can figure that out by reading his profile. And of course, a lot of these things they're lying about. So how are you going to know that, right? Until you ask them and you figure out they're lying, and then what? You're going to shut them down because they lied? Everybody lies online. It's just the way things are. It's a natural human nature thing. We lie because we don't want to tell the truth up front. We don't mind you finding out maybe in the long term, but we don't want to be judged up front on many things. And so those things we're supposed to find online. These things we suddenly are reduced to finding out about in person at that first coffee date, that 20-minute quick in and out to sort of figure out whether or not we could actually stand this person or not. And in actual fact, we actually figure out in about 15 to 30 seconds whether or not, versus the photos we've seen online and the stories we've told ourselves from those photos, and whether or not, generally, especially for the mature folks, they are not honest photos. They're photos that were taken a long time ago, or they're cropped. The favorite thing for women to do is to crop here at the shoulder so you cannot see the size of their upper arm and see how what their weight actually is. The reality is that when you walk into that coffee shop or bar or wherever it is, you know within seconds whether or not you would actually have wanted to, as I call it, cross the room to speak with them. I got a lot of women who were really ticked off with me because I wouldn't respond to their wink or their nudge or their note that they sent to me. And my response was, I'm sorry, but to be honest, I looked at all your photos, I glanced through them, 7, 8, 10, 11 pictures, sometimes just one, and I said, I'm sorry, I know I wouldn't have crossed the room to speak with you. Oh, well, I have such a great personality. Well, I'm sure you do. And maybe, if I had a lot of time on my hands, I'd if I was in a situation where I saw you across the room and spent enough time noticing you, I might have gone, well, maybe I will cross the room to talk to you. Or if I heard you get on stage speaking, maybe I'd go, wow, and I find this person interesting, I want to speak to them. But online, we just don't have time for all of that. And if we responded to everyone out there, we would never leave our computers. So the problem with online dating is that it works in exactly the reverse way that human beings naturally react. And the other thing is that as we mature, versus being under the age of 30 and dating, and I can remember that far back, we don't, at a mature age, after you're 40 years old, after you've been through your first marriage and having kids and being married for 10, 15, 20 years, and you've gotten divorced and you're now single again, you have a whole new set of criteria than you did when you were younger. Mature people have all kinds of understanding about the world that they didn't have back then. And they have different desires and different wishes. One very smart person I heard an author say, well, really what you have to do is constantly date your spouse throughout your life. Go on dates over and over again throughout your life because the other person is evolving and changing and you need to re-meet that new person, which is lovely. And if you can muster up the wherewithal to be able to divest yourself of all your memories of that person and truly re-meet them, that's fantastic. And maybe you can keep a marriage going forever. Most people aren't really able to do that. And most people, too, tend to mature away from each other. They don't really mature in parallel. Their interests change. What's important to them changes over time. Not always, but many times that changes. And I will do other video commentaries that talk about my theories on why humans do the bizarre things we do that speak to family and upbringing and all the rest of that down the road. But in terms of online dating and this dating appeal funnel, the truth is that you really have to play the numbers game online, and you've got to meet very quickly without wasting a lot of time back and forth trying to get on the phone with people and then finding out when you meet them you don't like them anyway. You've got to just go, okay, saw your pictures, I glanced through them, looked at your profile briefly, you seem like a decent person, you look like someone I would cross the room to speak to, especially if your photos are actually honest and current, and let's get together. Let's have a drink. I would never do coffees because coffees are stimulants that get you even more nervous than you are already. I would do a glass of wine and hope that, hey, in a calm setting with a glass of wine, we can be calm enough to enjoy each other's company and see whether or not we could at least be friends and maybe introduce each other to other friends we've got that are single. Or, hey, if things really go well, maybe there's a chance that we'll go out together and stick it out. Going back to the difference between how online dating works for mature people and how it works for young people. You'll hear over and over again, oh yeah, now over 60 or 70% of the people who get married met online. And I would say, yeah, that's kind of true, but then a lot of that is meeting on Tinder. And for young people, meeting on Tinder is not quite the same as mature people trying to meet online. Because, no offense to the young people watching this video, when I was under 30, and I'd say up to about 30 for women and up to about 35 for men, the reality is the only criteria that we had for getting all the way up to marriage was, number one, is she or he sufficiently attractive for me to want to go out with them and stick around with them? And number two, is he or she actually willing to date me? And on the back of those two criteria alone, you would go out, go on a date, start having sex, move in together, decide to buy a house together, decide to get pregnant or accidentally get pregnant, and get married and spend 15 years raising those kids, 20 years raising those kids. So for mature folks, there are a ton more criteria. For the men and the women, way more for the women than the men, but there's still a lot for both sexes. Having gone through a lot of life experience, you now have a lot of new criteria for finding a partner that you want to stick it out with, and you will enjoy sticking it out with. Thank you so much for watching. And if you got this far, that likely means you have a sincerely curious mind. And curious people tend to be high on the IQ bell curve, which makes you a member of my target audience. If you'd like to comment down below, I'd be more than happy to have an intellectual debate with you. If you've watched a few of my videos and I've managed to change the way that you see the world, even just a little bit, then please consider either clicking on the PayPal link below to buy me a beer or becoming an ongoing patron by clicking on the Patreon link. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you on the other side of the camera again sometime soon. I hope you got something out of my thinking, and if you think I deserve it, please click on the thumbs up sign down below. If you'd like to watch more of my insights into what drives our sometimes peculiar behavior, please click on the links beside me to other videos I've posted. To get notified when I put something new out, click on the subscribe link below me. If you feel inclined to really help me out, do all of the above, as it helps my ranking on YouTube go up.